Space, 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 space. Space, 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 space. If you want to know about space, you have to know about the planets. If you want to know about the planets, you have to listen to me right now. Sun, Mercury, Uranus, water planets, Pluto, and this one they didn't have a name for it yet. It's too far away. You can name it if you want. You can name it Doris after my mom. If you want. It's up to you.
A little bit of Steve Brule there to kick things off. Welcome everyone. So this will be our first live stream, I think, in like 2 years, something like this. But it's great to see everybody here. So we have Divine Feminine Astrology. Thanks for joining. Can I see everyone in the chat? If you wouldn't mind, just send over a quick hello. We can see all who's in here. All right, Julie, great to see you. Thanks for joining. Felicity, Harry Gold, Caroline, Robin Christina. All right, so it looks like it's going to be quite intimate here. There's only a few of us, so we can get deep into some things. If there's any specific things you guys wanted to look at, I was thinking we could look at maybe some of the stuff for the year ahead and go over some of that collective stuff. Hi, everyone. So there will be a bit of a lag, obviously. My internet's not the fastest, so it will be a little bit between questions. But yeah, welcome, everyone. So I don't know about you guys, but we had this, Pluto square Mars, which was, I think, yesterday. Actually, I think we're still kind of in it now. And that was quite intense. At least it felt that way. If you guys have any experiences with that, let me know. Did you guys feel it quite intensely? We usually do. I would say it's probably the aspect that is probably the most intense, actually, because you have Mars, which is that very ego drive part of the self. And then you've got Pluto, which is very much anti that. And in a square, of course, being the most challenging aspect. But yeah, so I was like, I basically deleted this file that had like all these updates that I wanted to do with the website. I had this thing for 3 or 4 years, and I kept adding to it. And I just pasted over it and saved it and closed it. And so that was the end of that file. Which a part of me was like really, really upset. But then in a strange way, it felt very liberating. I felt very liberated when that happened. And in a way, overall, I can see it now in retrospect. I'm actually glad that it happened because it freed me from what was like basically this never-ending list of to-do things. And so I just wrote down the few things that are the most important, have a fresh new start. But yeah, that really, really tested things for me. So let me go and check the chat. I'll see if there are any similar stories. Again, Mars squaring Pluto these past few days. And yeah, we'll get to all of your questions too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julie, for sending the questions. Yes, it looks like the consensus is pretty difficult there. But yeah, well, maybe we'll come back to it, but I'd love to hear some of your stories if you have any, if there was anything in particular. And all in all, just feeling the energy, I think, has been the most intense, All right, so we'll go ahead and start with some of these questions. Actually, you know what I would like to do? How's the internet connection? And can everyone hear me okay? And is it laggy? Because my internet's only streaming at about 3 megabytes per second. And I don't know if that's fast. I don't know if it's lagging. If it isn't, then I'm going to go ahead and turn on some music here. So just let me know if the stream is good. All right, so we'll go with Julie's question here. So Julie asks, would love insights on the second U.S. Pluto return coming up in July. And what do you see as the most profound transits coming up in the next year? Well, yeah, that's definitely the most profound there. I would say Pluto entering Capricorn. So we haven't talked too much about this. Let's go ahead and get deep into it here. So I'll go ahead and pull up. This is just the chart for today. And what I'll do here is go ahead and make this easier to see. So we've got Pluto entering Capricorn. That's over here, right here at the top of the chart. So yeah, Pluto's actually already started to go into there. And for those that don't know, this is where the US has its Pluto, is right at the beginning of Capricorn. So if you think back to the late 1700s, what the US was born into was basically Pluto going into Capricorn, and this idea of Pluto transforming, all of the systems and structures that we had up to that point. And it's actually very interesting if you continue to follow this pattern. So it happens about every 250 years. And if you follow that pattern, you'll see the same sort of things. We tend to go through major transformations to things like our governments, our political systems, economic systems as well, and really just a complete transformation to how we structure society. So the late 1700s, again, the US was, I think, the leader of this, which was born under this energy of transforming existing power structures. And if you think about what the power structures were back in the late 1700s, at least as far as the Western world is concerned, we were primarily living under monarchy. Everything was very much about single rulers, what we would think of today as more kind of dictatorial, but monarchies nonetheless. And so, of course, the U.S., born in this, transformed that, right? And started to plant these new seeds of new forms of government. Not really new, because we were doing, democratic and republic forms of government already. A lot of this came from the ancient Greeks, and even during the Roman time, was very much this style of government that we're seeing in the world today. Since then, since the late 1700s. So it really transformed the monarchies into more democratic and more republic forms of government. And that's what we've seen these past 250 years. And that's what I think we're going to see with this one as well, except I think that the pendulum, is going to swing the other way. At least that's the pattern we see. So again, if you follow this every 250 years, you'll see that the pendulum sort of swings between what you might call a little bit more of a individualism, individual form of governance, like, for example, with republics and democracies, to more kind of top-down forms of government. And I don't think that's going to mean that we're going to go back to monarchy or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a restructuring of what we have into probably where we're seeing things heading already, which is in that more kind of higher order, higher structure on things from the top down kind of structures. But the important thing here is that it's advancing humanity towards the right direction. I think it's all about balance between these two, right? We need governments, but of course we also need individual freedom. And so we don't want to go, of course, too far into individual freedom either, right? As we've seen, that can create a lot of problems. And of course, we don't want to go too far into government control, either giving too much power to the state or to other people. So, of course, hopefully through all these iterations of Pluto going over Capricorn every 250 years, I do believe that it's progressing humanity forward. and in this case, restructuring the systems, right? Basically restructuring the old and outworn forms of governance and economic systems and all this kind of thing. So I don't think it's going to be as let's say intense. I do believe that the pattern seems to be that things are getting less and less intense with each of these Pluto over Capricorns. In other words, I don't think we're necessarily going to see things like wars or revolutions or civil wars like we saw. I think we could definitely classify them as such, but not in the same way, with all these deaths and things. I mean, the amount of people that died during the revolutions, because again, it wasn't just the US, this spread to Europe, and then, we had the French revolutions and so many other countries around the world removing their monarchies and going into these, again, more democratic or republic forms of government. But it was very intense. So I don't think it's going to be necessarily that intense or anything, but, definitely a restructuring. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section of what you feel like Pluto going into Capricorn will be. Now, keep in mind, Pluto will be in Capricorn for a long time. So we're talking, close to 20 years, 15 to, I think it's about 18 years, because Capricorn is a little bit smaller with true sidereal. And that's why, of course, we saw the revolutions not just in the late 1700s and went into the early 1800s as well. Okay, so it is a period. It does take time, but it is starting. And so Pluto has already started to enter into Capricorn for the most part this year, since February, but is officially in there now. With Pluto's slow movement and retrogrades, it takes a lot of time. It takes multiple years for Capricorn to officially enter a sign, but he has officially entered this year. So as Julie pointed out, this is, of course, then the Pluto return, which means that the Pluto is coming back to the same place it was during the birth of the U.S. So it's the U.S.'s Pluto return. So it really is the first iteration of this. And if you look at other civilizations that have lasted through multiple of these, like for example, the most recent would be like Great Britain, it does end up being a restructuring to the systems. And in this case, I think the U.S. along with the rest of the world, but maybe primarily the U.S. since it's the actual U.S.'s Pluto return. And we can see that, I think politically we're seeing, even when you're factoring all the other countries in the world, we can see the intensity of the U.S. political system at the moment. We can see the, real intensity, you could say, of the economic outcomes of how we've been running things since the last 250 years. By the way, economically, 250 years ago was mercantilism, okay? So that, and also globalism in the sense of traveling around the world and starting to colonize other parts of the world. So this whole kind of the way we think of banking now and trade in terms of what you might call this this kind of free market kind of energy, has been the past 250 years as well. So you can look back at that pattern, but that's transforming as well. And so a lot of things, very important, definitely Pluto entering Capricorn. So let me go ahead and go to the chat here and see what you all have to say about this one. All right, lots of questions here. Yeah, the energy. So sleep, right. Sleep was affecting me too with this Mars square Pluto. We were talking about the Mars square Pluto earlier. Yeah. I'm glad it's not lagging. That's good. All right, sounds great. Cool. So Julie says the Pluto return will be around July 15th or 16th. I haven't checked the exact date of that. Yeah, so that's a really good question from Margaret. So do I think we'll see more of a forward-moving changes once Pluto goes direct in fall? Yeah, I would say so. I think that's when Pluto's retrograde, which by the way, Pluto's retrograde for about half of the year, but when he's retrograde, it does tend to make things more on the back burner and more inwardly as well. So we can be feeling, personally a lot of Pluto energy right now, personally, like in our inner world. And that's why I think things like that Pluto square Mars can feel very intense. But when we're dealing with collective things, definitely when the planet goes direct, we start to see it manifesting more in the outer world. So yeah, when Pluto goes direct in fall, let me go ahead and get that date for you all here, exactly when Pluto's going direct here. Oh, actually, I don't have it on this. Yep, actually didn't include it on this. Let me go ahead and just animate this chart. Oh, whoops, I'm doing it by years. Not by years. Oh man, 2024. Here we go. Months. There we go. Yeah, so Pluto will go direct here in October, is it? Yeah, so October 12th. So October 12th, I think, will be significant, for those implementations of Pluto. Then, of course, for those 6 months after that, in terms of applying that. So let's see. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section about Pluto entering Capricorn. I'm going to go ahead and just take a minute to put on some music here since we're not experiencing any lag. And just let me know if it does start to lag now that I put on the music. But hopefully not. Yeah, and let me know what you guys think too about doing these live streams. I think if we did them more often, I think it'd be very constructive. We could kind of talk about how we've experienced things in the recent months or kind of revisit topics and things. Before I turn on the music here, actually just want to make sure that you guys have all seen Steve Brule, because Steve Brule is the master astrologer, and we should all very much listen to what Steve Brule has to say here.
Space. If you want to know about space, you have to know about the planets. If you want to know about the planets, you have to listen to me right now. Sun, Mercury, Uranus, water planets, Pluto, and this one they didn't have a name for it yet. It's too far away. You can name it if you want. You can name it Doris after my mom. If you want. It's up to you.
Check it out. Steve Brule, master astrologer. And yeah, what do you guys call that distant planet? Give me your names for that distant planet that doesn't have a name yet. That Steve Brule names Doris after his aunt. All right, let's get some music going here. And let me know if the music ends up being too loud or not loud enough. All right, so let me go back to the chat here and see what kind of questions we have. Yeah, so then there's the election, which is like a whole other thing, right? In the US, right? So during the Pluto return, Haven't gotten too far into natal charts or things like that. I do know that Mars will be retrograde though. So let's do it. Let's take a look at kind of some of this. I don't want to get too caught up in the US stuff. We're not all from the US, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. So, a couple things stand out to me around that time. We don't have any major eclipses necessarily. I mean, we have an eclipse on October 2nd, but, what is it? Is it November 15th? I think that's the election, but around there. No major stuff except for the fact that Venus will be over the galactic center. And Mars will then be going retrograde a little bit later on December 6th. So... And November, that kind of election time, the sun is, and usually the lunar cycle is involving Libra. So that's usually where we'll see themes around like legal stuff, obviously, and like what's fair, what's right, what's balanced. Typical actual election kind of stuff there. But then the sun does, go into Scorpio. And then oftentimes, like we have this year, Venus and Mercury will be... in Scorpio and Ophiuchus, which then tends to add a little bit more of that kind of intensity and transformative energy. So actually, the last time we had Venus over the galactic center during an election was during the Hillary-Trump election. And then, in retrospect, we can see that Trump had an advantage with Venus, the feminine energy, being in the galactic center. Because as a lot of you know, the galactic center is that very, very transformative part of the sky, right? It's the center of the galaxy. And so when planets pass over the galactic center, it ends up being very, very much like it depletes the planet's energy, but only temporarily until it transforms out the other side. So the death and rebirth, right? But right on the galactic center really is that death point. So anyways, that's going on too. That's going on at the same time as well, which is interesting. You can draw whatever parallels you want with that. Mercury will also be in Scorpio. So again, we see the intensity there with that. But what's really standing out to me about the election month specifically is the Mars retrograde. So that would typically mean that anything that has been implemented, we tend to go back and redo. And so me personally, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a kind of election where there maybe is a recount or maybe is some sort of going back and redoing things and whatnot. And it wouldn't surprise me too if that actually goes on beyond the inauguration, which I believe the inauguration is usually in late January, if I'm not mistaken, mid to late January, because Mars goes direct February 23rd, and oftentimes it can take that entire period of the retrograde, in order for things to get resolved with it. So that's very interesting to me. Let me know what you guys think about that. If you think that the Mars retrograde is not going to play a role in the election, because again, it's not happening like during the voting or anything like that. It's happening after. So what did we say here? December 6th, 7th? Mars goes retrograde. But that is very significant, I think. Mars only goes retrograde once every roughly 2.5 years. So quite significant, coupled with the Venus and Mercury stuff we talked about. But maybe not too much, right? Because normally if it was something major, some sort of very transformative thing or whatever, we would probably see some outer planets doing something, like the Pluto doing something, or maybe Uranus or something, but we don't really see that. So I think it'll be really concentrated in those first few months and maybe nothing too much. But yeah, it wouldn't be the first time there's a Mars retrograde during an election, and there certainly wouldn't be the first time Venus is over the galactic center and Mercury's in Scorpio. So nothing totally out of the ordinary here, but drawing parallels with what we've talked about. Yeah, let me know what you guys think there. Hope you like the music. Let me know if it's again too loud or whatnot. I'll go ahead and check the chat. Also, Julie's birthday is on that Pluto return. Yeah, so more people not sleeping very well with the Mars square Pluto. Yeah, interesting. So Margaret asks, how do we know where plants will be in the future? Well, that's that's where we need these programs like Prometheus. I'm really grateful that we have Prometheus. There's obviously a lot of things that can be improved, but the fact that we have an astrology software that uses true sidereal is really awesome. And so with that, we're able to see, like I just showed you with the graph, we can see exactly where all the planets will be in the future. And then, we just kind of make these kinds of, I don't believe in predicting things. I don't believe that our futures have been predetermined, but there are certainly patterns, and we see these cycles in life. And so we can start to make these sort of probabilistic determinations, right? What are the probabilities that certain things might happen during certain times? Very much like the weather, The weather is always probabilities. Even if it's going to rain, it's always some percentage. It can be a very high percentage, and with astrology, we can get to some of these high percentages with, quote unquote predictions. But it needs to be, I think, treated as such, because again, there is free will, I do believe, within these cycles, within the predetermined cycles. And plus, we're only human. No one's able to predict anything fully anyways. But with probabilities, looking at what's called confluence, where you see a lot of things lining up towards the same thing. Like if you notice a lot of repeating patterns, a lot of Mars energy combined with Aries energy or whatever, where you start to see parallels, that's where you can really increase those percentages of prediction. So Daniela has a question. What does it mean when we have strong opposites in the chart? Example, Sun and Leo in the 12th. How do you suggest we handle the energy? Right, so oppositions, very much about balance. Now, if you going deeper with this, if you go by the idea, this sort of Jungian idea that, let me go ahead and pull up a chart here. If you go by this Jungian idea that we all have this sort of shadow self, okay? So you have the ego, which is the conscious self, and this is the part that is like the I am, right? It's like I am this, I am that, I identify with this, I like this, I don't like that. The identity, right? The ego. Jungian perspective is that by doing that, we cast a shadow, and that shadow is the unconscious. Or what he literally calls the shadow. And so this is, the unconscious mind is where all of the opposites of that go. Because if you think of the human being as the full spectrum of life, right? Our true self is in the middle of the zodiac wheel, right? We are all the signs. And I think that's why a lot of us can identify with different signs and placements. Because the truth is that, our true self is the full spectrum of life. It is the entire zodiac, united and balanced into one. So the shadow is just everything that's not part of the ego, right? So you have the conscious self and the unconscious self. And what we figured out with astrology is that the planets themselves are, let's say, the conscious self fragmented into different parts. Now, I get that there are outer planets like Uranus and Neptune, which are much closer to the unconscious and even in the unconscious, right? Like Uranus and Neptune are not seen visibly in the sky. And so this is very symbolic for the parts of ourselves that are not visibly seen. But it's still the more physical self or the ego self fragmented into different parts. And I would say that the Uranus and Neptune are the gateways to the shadow or the gateways to the true self, not necessarily the shadow. Gateways to the unconscious, right? To incorporate the true self, right? Because we need to incorporate the shadow self, the unconscious self, in order to be more of our true selves and more whole and more complete. So with the chart, if you are under that assumption that the planets themselves, like the sun, the moon, etc., are the conscious self, then the exact opposite would be the unconscious projection or the shadow of that. You can actually create a whole chart of that is the shadow chart. So you would basically take all of your planetary placements and invert them. So if you're a sun in Virgo, then your shadow is a sun in Pisces. Your shadow chart is a sun in Pisces. If your moon is in Capricorn like this, then your moon in the shadow chart would be in Cancer. And so oppositions are, I think, extremely important, very powerful like this, in the sense that it's really about unifying the conscious self and the unconscious self. So when looking at oppositions in the chart, I think as it is with any aspect, I think the best way to approach it is to always read it from the more personal planet's perspective. So basically the faster planet, right? The sun, the moon, the fast movers like Mercury, Venus, and Mars. That's the more ego, right? That's the more in the outer visible self, right? The sun, the moon, these are the strongest parts of the ego, and then we kind of get more into the unconscious from there. So the faster the planet, basically, right, the more personal it is. So you take the more personal planet. Let's use this example. So we have here, this is actually just October of 2024. But if it was someone's birth chart, we've got Venus opposite Uranus. So Venus is the more personal planet here. And so we're going to feel it from her perspective, right? We're not going to feel it so much from Uranus's perspective, right? The Uranus part of ourself is, again, more in the unconscious or closer to it. Whereas Venus is definitely a part we really identify with, right? We can really identify with our Venus sign. So this person would be a Venus in Libra, very much valuing fairness and what's right and just, especially with Venus in the 7th house like this. So from that context, from Venus's perspective, Uranus is influencing that. And Uranus here playing more of the shadow role, as any more outer planet would, right? So here there's an unconscious need for Uranus in Taurus, let's say, in this chart, or Uranus in the 1st house. And so this might be a need to be more independent. This is, again, more on the shadow. Make this very clear, because this is where the Venus shadow would be, remember? The Venus shadow would be where the Uranus is in this opposition. So the Venus shadow is trying to seek more Taurus energy, right? The opposite. In the 1st house energy, more independence. And so it's an opportunity to unify the self, to integrate basically both sides of the Venus placement. So the Venus placement and the opposite to that. And this actually brings up a question too I get asked a lot, which is what happens if there's signs that aren't normally opposite? Because in true Sidereal, we're using the actual size of the constellations as we see them visually. And so because they're not all 30 degrees, you're going to have untraditional oppositions like this. For example, Venus in Libra is opposite Uranus in Taurus. So when we go to read Taurus as being opposite Libra, we wouldn't normally think that, right? We think Aries is opposite Libra, which it is. But there's also a part of Taurus, and it's the very beginning of Taurus, that is opposite Libra. And so that beginning of Taurus is definitely the more self-reliant part of Taurus, right? Because it's closer to Aries. So it's more self-oriented. So very self-reliant. It's more about cultivating those inner resources, personal resources, natural gifts, natural talents, all relating to the self. So you have a very self-oriented energy of where the Venus shadow is. And then you've got the more conscious Venus, which is in Libra. So the conscious person here would be very much about valuing fairness, what's right, what's just, Venus in Libra. But what happens when you project this into the world? What happens when you are connecting with Venus and enjoying this sense of fairness and what's right and what's just? You're unconsciously projecting a very strong sense and need for independence and self-orientedness, paradoxically. And so what do we have? We have a shadow that has a need for independence. We have a conscious self that has a need for fairness and balance. And here's the dichotomy, here's the challenge. How can we integrate these two opposite things? And this is what I think we want to strive towards with any chart, whether there's oppositions or not, is again to try to operate somewhere in the middle of the chart, right? The center of the chart, to incorporate the entire zodiac into the center where the true self is, or as close to it as possible. So the oppositions are an opportunity to do that, to integrate these two. So in this case, to embrace more of that Uranus energy of wanting independence, wanting to express one's own needs, instead of with Venus and Libra being more other-oriented as, all the time, incorporating a little bit more self-interest, a little bit more self-orientation, a little bit more focusing on one's needs, right? So integrating the other and the self, the other orientation and the self-orientation, the need for a relationship and the need for independence. And this is what this particular opposition would be, but as you'll see, any opposition is about integrating these two opposites. So that's, I think, a great way of approaching it. Again, a simple way of approaching it is read it from the more personal planet's perspective. So in this case, from Venus's perspective. And that Uranus here is trying to get us, or whatever the other more outer planet is trying to get us to incorporate the shadow of that in a healthy way, to become more conscious of it, to incorporate it more into the ego, in this case, to incorporate it more into our Venus self. It's a very good question. Oppositions are very, very unique. And let me know if any of you have ever looked at your shadow chart. Unfortunately, Prometheus can't cast that, but you can go in and just do it manually. You basically look at your chart and see, and just do the opposites. So, again, whatever your sun sign is, you would be the opposite. Your moon sign would be the opposite. That would be your shadow. That would be how your unconscious self is operating, or what your unconscious needs are. All right, so just going through some of these more questions here. Yeah, live streams are cool because we get to just, I don't know, it's pretty chill. Just listen to music, talk astrology. It's not so fast-paced. With pre-recorded videos, there's this thing of just kind of talking and talking and talking. And I mean, I guess I'm still kind of doing that now, but I get to take these little bit of pauses, engage more, listen to some questions, and of course, listen to music, which is very relaxing. All right, so we have some Steve Brule fans out there. Yeah, and I love that skit on the planets. Great to have you. Great to have you all. Is it Machani? Great to have you, Machani. Great for you to be here. Thank you. So, question from Robin: how can we find the galactic center in reference to our own chart? So the galactic center with the true sidereal chart, so you can find this, of course, on the website, Mastering the Zodiac, or if you're using Prometheus, you can find it there. But it's just right at the end of Ophiuchus, okay? So with true sidereal, the galactic center is the last two, is the second to last degree of Ophiuchus, so right here at the end. Okay. So right where, if you can see my mouse, it's right where my mouse is pointing there. So you can see where the galactic center is in your own chart. I do recommend everyone do this. Ophiuchus is already itself a very, very potent energy. Of course, it's the center of the galaxy. So we place so much emphasis on the sun, which is the center of our solar system, which is, of course, very valuable. We place so much emphasis on the moon, which is, of course, orbiting around us, let's say. But we tend to neglect the fact, or at least, let's say, forget the fact, that our whole solar system, or what we think is our solar system, this whole planets and everything that are moving together, is rotating around the galactic center. So our galaxy has a central star. It's not a star, it's a black hole, but we're all rotating around it. Of course, over millions of years, but it's still a rotation. And so very, very important, right? And for those of you who've looked at the sky and you've looked at the Milky Way, you'll see it's extremely energetic, right? Tons of stars, so many stars concentrated in the center of the galaxy that it looks like a cloud. You know, the first time I saw the galactic center for the first time, I thought it was just the atmosphere. I thought it was clouds. I thought it was some sort of atmospheric cloud thing, because it looks like a nebula. You know, it's so thick in energy, in star energy, that it's not just stars, it's literally like light. So anyways, yeah, the Milky Way. And it's what you see a lot with these pictures of the sky. You know, you see that band of stars, right? That's the center. That's the Milky Way. That's the center of the galaxy. That's what's the very center of that, where that crosses the ecliptic, or the path of the planets. That's where the galactic center is in the chart. So where it is in your chart is extremely valuable. Again, it's that death and rebirth. So again, go to the website if you don't have your chart, or use Prometheus, or if you can remember where the end of Ophiuchus is. But this is the house, and especially if you have planets next to it, then those planets will definitely be energized by it and transformed by it. But wherever the galactic center is, it is that death and rebirth. And you can very much read it the same way as Pluto. It's different. The galactic center is not a planet like Pluto, but it's that same death and rebirth energy. And so whatever the house is, because it will at least be in a house for you. Maybe there's no planets next to it, like in this example chart, there's no planets next to it, but it is always going to be in a house. And so for this person, if this was a natal chart, the galactic center would be in the 8th house. And so the 8th house deals with like shared resources, deeper relationships, deeper values. So it's all this like deeper, richer life and deeper relationship stuff. And so that's what this person will be in this life, going through major transformations with, learning non-attachment with, death and rebirths with. So it's extremely important to be really non-attached to the house and planets that the galactic center is in, the house that the galactic center is in. If it's in, say, the relationship area, the 7th house, being non-attached to relationships, and doing things with the house that the galactic center is in a way that's more for spiritual reasons and soul reasons, right? Definitely not for ego reasons. The same way that Pluto is this sort of ego killer, so to speak, the galactic center is very much the same way. It's where we have these ego deaths. And they're very valuable, very important for spiritual growth and transformation, right? So the house that the galactic center is in, the end of Ophiuchus, is where we can practice that ego death. We can have more non-attachment. We can allow for that transformation and connect to the area and enjoy the area much more on a spiritual level and soul level, right? Instead of on an ego level. If we do approach the house from a more ego level, that's where we tend to run into, issues, and where it can be quite intense. Intensity and suffering and really overt challenges, come from, of course, the ego holding on, right? Which is normal, natural, as we should be doing that. It's, part of our physical self. But the area of the galactic center, yeah, really good to approach more for spirituality, more in a yin way, more for soul fulfillment. So for this person, enjoying those deeper relationships and those deeper values in life in a way that's much more non-attached and in a way that is more for soul reasons. So if this person were to, say, go out and try to attain a lot of resources through loans, debts, government stuff, maybe investors, maybe borrowing stuff, getting caught up into codependent or toxic interdependent kind of situations or whatever, this would be very difficult for the person, right? Because that would be the person trying to find fulfillment through this sector on an ego level. But if instead the person said, screw it, I'm not attached, I'm grateful for how things are with my deeper relationships, I'm grateful for how things are financially, then the person liberates themselves. And so the galactic center helps us do that, where we can have more spiritual liberation. Extremely important part of the chart. And of course, any planets that are there would mean that those planets can go through that transformation as well. And it's really good to, do that. All right, heading back over to the chat here. Yeah, let me know where some of your galactic center placements are. If you know it on the top of your head, or if you go to the website and use the chart calculator, I'd be very curious, because I notice a lot of patterns, right? Because I do these readings and I start to see that I have a lot of people with similar placements getting readings. And I don't think it's because necessarily, part of it's because they're into astrology, and obviously if you have ninth house placements, like astrology placements, you're going to be more into getting readings in the first place. But obviously me as an astrologer only appeals to certain people, right? And of course, this would be the more true sidereal 13 sign. I would imagine those that are more into research and uncovering deep stuff, right, to even find this stuff in the first place. So I wonder if the galactic center placement is a common theme for us. I'd be curious to see where all of your galactic center placements are. So mine's in the 7th house. Okay, mine's in the 7th house. I can see Christine is also in the 7th house, which is interesting. She has her galactic center in the 7th house. Machani is in the 9th. I'll just go through. Yeah, so let me know. Let me know where your galactic center is if you know where that is. And I'll go through some more of these questions, and we'll come back to that. The one thing about the YouTube chat is like it kind of scrolls you down, and then you end up missing a lot of questions because you have to scroll back up, and then you have to kind of find out where you left off here. Let's see. So I think the music's very low. Yeah, it's probably very low. I'll just kind of angle the microphone there a little bit. All right, thanks, PC. I'm glad you're enjoying Prometheus. Yeah, it's a really great software. Really happy to have it. It's developed by Gavin Burns with Capricorn Astrology. So a big shout out to Gavin for creating that software. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be able to do what we're doing, at least not to this scale. Hey, Christine. Yeah, so no membership, but I am thinking about expanding things with the website, with particularly the chart calculator. So I hope to make it soon where you can save charts, load charts. So I'm thinking about creating this kind of whole ecosystem where the chart will be involved. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any ideas about memberships or a way we can kind of, there's like things like forums, but I don't know, it's kind of outdated. Could have maybe, so there's Facebook groups already. So also a shout out to Ike Rodriguez. He's another sidereal astrologer. For those who want a Facebook group, it's called Sidereal Revolution. You can just type that into Facebook if you're into that. That's cool too. But yeah, I'd love if there was a way, maybe even an app or something like this, where we can get the community together. Yeah, energy potential for prediction. Yeah, I like that. Right, so Mind Mastery asks, what are these patterns or energies exactly? Referring to the transits, right? So when we say that these energies and galactic centers energetic, and we have these transits with the outer planets, and it's this kind of energy, like Mars square Pluto was an intense energy. Yeah, so there's different schools of thought. Some believe that the planets actually are emitting energy. That does seem to be the most popular belief. I'm sure a lot of you share that same belief, to view the planets as literally having an effect on Earth, and in a sort of Newtonian sense, like having a cause and effect on us because of electromagnetism, because of the solar system itself holding a frequency, holding an energy of where we're at certain times. I personally come from the background that the planets aren't doing anything physical to us. I believe that the planets are just telling us what time it is. And when we're born, we can see what time it was, in the sense that the life, the cosmos, the universe was at a certain period in its own cycle. So if we think of the universe as going through cycles, right? We talked about the solar system cycle, the galactic center cycle. There's probably other cycles as well. But if you think of the universe as this sort of cog, this kind of moving of energy, but in a very systematic way, then the planets are just telling us where we're at in those cycles, because we know that when a planet is in a certain spot, that the same thing tends to happen. Why do certain things happen when the planets are in these spots? And I believe it's just, we've just superimposed our sort of interpretations of it, but we notice that pattern. So for example, when Jupiter's in Cancer, we notice a lot of expansion around personal life or family type matters, or caring and nurturing, which we see a lot with Cancer, and we see Jupiter expands it. But I don't think it's because Jupiter is like emitting something from Cancer or anything like that, as much as it's, we just kept noticing this pattern. Every time Jupiter goes into Cancer, this repeating pattern happens. We are in this phase of this cycle. And so the planets are just part of the universe, going through these same cycles as the rest of the universe, and we're just using them as timekeepers. And we've noticed these patterns that keep happening when they're in certain spots. And that's why I think we've given the zodiac certain characteristics, right? Because if you look at something like Cancer, the constellation of Cancer, you could say it looks like a crab, which is what we've classified it, but it could be honestly anything. It could be a dog, it could be another human. So we give it the crab because that's the symbol for what we experience when planets are in that particular configuration. Before Cancer, before the crab, it was the scarab beetle in Egyptian, ancient Egyptian astrology. And even at some point, the turtle. I can't recall exactly where the turtle came from, but you see it's the same theme. The protective shell, the soft insides, the more personal parts of life that need to be protected and boundaried and cared for. So we use these different symbols to symbolize that. But again, the actual constellations, and I think we just attributed that based on what we know as those patterns. But again, I totally respect anyone who believes that the planets are real. It's even possible that, if you believe, there's this idea that actual entities, like higher dimensional beings, the way we would see them in this 3D world would be as a sphere. So a sphere is a very interesting thing. And, if you get into kind of higher perceptions on how we perceive things in different dimensions. So for example, like, we can view things in a 2-dimension. In fact, that is how we actually view reality, is actually on a 2-dimensional screen, really, because our eyes are only picking up 2-dimensional, but we're in this 3-dimensional reality. And so we can gauge where we're at in that 3-dimensional reality, but we're really observing it in 2 dimensions. But anyways, the way we might see a higher dimensional being might look like a sphere to us. And so it's very possible that planets are actually entities. And that a lot of that comes from Vedic astrology as well. And that these entities are actually having an effect on us. So I totally respect that idea as well. Maybe it's a little bit of combination of both. And actually, let me know what you guys think. Are you more on the camp of the planets having an effect on us? Or are you more in the camp of this kind of, we're just in these cycles and we're just telling the time of where we're at in these cycles? Thank you, Ari Gold. Yep. So true. We are all the signs. 100%. Yep. And I think that's what astrology really helps us with the most, is to, bridge those oppositions, operate in the center of the chart. And, astrology only goes so far. I think at the end of the day, astrology is helpful, but it's just a tool. And that tool only goes so far. At the end of the day, I think all the other teachings and just really what, all these spiritual teachings and other mediums are really about is living from that true self, from that center point, that the center of the chart, that the center of the chart represents. So Julie says that I see the galactic center as the area of greatest untapped personal creativity and sector of life you're here to transform relative to your house placement. Just my 2 cents. Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting to see it as personal creativity. Actually, yeah, let me know if you guys resonate with that. The house that the galactic center is in being where we have this untapped creativity, because that is very energetic, right? The creation, right? So we have the center of the galaxy, the galactic center, the birth in many ways of this galaxy, right? So I don't know exactly how our particular galaxy was created, but being the center point, I think it's certainly safe to assume that if the galactic center itself didn't give birth to everything else, that it at least all originated from there, right? And that's why it's the largest black hole, because black holes grow, and so that would mean that this black hole has been getting larger and larger and larger, and probably keeping more and more planets close, within its orbit, and creating and birthing new ones within its orbit. So the galactic center is very much like the father or the mother in terms of the creative energy. Well, it'd be more like the mother, actually. So maybe the sun is more like the father because it's solar energy, that's more yang. Maybe the galactic center would be more of the mother, but definitely that creative energy. Absolutely. So wherever the galactic center would be in the chart could definitely be that untapped creative potential that we probably have to dive really deep to access, as you're saying, to transform. Fantana Ranha asks anything relating to demolishing a house in that conjunction. Are you referring to galactic center conjunction? But yeah, we would want to, either way with the galactic center, we'd want to sort of quote unquote demolish that chart, transform that, that house, transform that part of the house. Being willing to allow the death of it, I think would be a great way of approaching it. So Felicity, what is the meaning of a kite in a chart? So the kite, I think the simplest way of saying it without sounding too cliche, would be that it shows us where we can fly high, okay? So there's no kite here, but basically, and I wish I had a drawing tool, which I don't have, But basically, a kite is where you have a grand trine. Actually, you can see one here. I don't know if you can see. You have to look, but it's this blue one here. So you've got two. It's to Pluto. You got two sextiles on both sides of Pluto, and then you've got this grand trine here. I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like a kite. And then, of course, there's the opposition. So this would be the Pluto-Mars opposition. So the kite is where we can fly high, and basically what you want to do is you want to, that might be too loud. You might, what you want to do is you want to embody the planet that's at the top of the kite in terms of where we can, quote unquote, fly high. So in this case, it's Pluto. So here we would want to, this person would want to embrace more of that Pluto energy in their chart in order to lift up or bring in those other planets involved in the kite. So in this case, it's Neptune, Venus, and Mars, the grand trine ones. Okay, but that lifts us up. But we want to stay grounded too, and that's where the base of the kite comes in. We don't want to go too far ahead. In this case, with Pluto, we want to ground it with Mars. So the bottom of it, the planet at the bottom of the kite, helps us ground it. And so finding, again, the balance that we talked about with that. But the two planets on the sides are supporting that balance. They're supporting that opposition. And so integrating them into it, utilizing them, can be helpful because, again, they're supporting it by sextiles and trines. So they're supporting it. But yeah, take a look at the inside of your chart, everyone, and look at the aspect patterns, what are called the aspect patterns, which is the configurations of these of the planets, and that can mean, you know, basically how to integrate the different planets in your chart. All right, let's see. So how do computer models, software know when retrogrades will occur? Same way. So it's using an ephemeris inside the software. And usually what it's doing is it's shooting a whole bunch of checks at certain intervals, or what are called time steps. And it tries to narrow in and find out exactly when that event occurred within the ephemeris. So the ephemeris is just basically a list of all the planetary placements, their speeds, which show you directions when it slows down and everything. So yeah, it's the software uses time stepping and usually bisection to find those exact moments within the ephemeris, which is a list of all these placements. It looks like this stream is kind of slow from my end, so I'm going to turn off the music here. So Machani asks, I'm sure you already answered this before, but would you call the house of Ophiuchus the 8th and a half house, or just the 13th and tail it at the end? So I think that's a great question. So what I believe Machani is asking here is, you know, we have 13 signs, but we have 12 houses. Why am I using 12 houses instead of 13 houses? And the reason is that Scorpio and Ophiuchus both share the same part of the sky. And so if you look at this visually, which a lot of you have seen in the weekly forecast, but let's go ahead and look at it here. So here's Scorpio and Ophiuchus. So this is Scorpio down here. I think you can all see this. Scorpio down here. This is Ophiuchus up here. You can see they literally share the exact same part of the sky. So where Scorpio begins, Ophiuchus begins, and where Ophiuchus ends, Scorpio ends, literally. So they're a dual sign, and that's why it does make some sense to remove Ophiuchus. All right, that's probably the last thing a lot of you would expect me to say, being a 13th sign astrologer, but I can see it because they are the same part of the sky, and that's why I use 12 houses instead of 13. So the 8th house becomes the Scorpio and Ophiuchus house, the dual sign house, the 8th part of the sky, as they share the 8th part of the sky. But the question is you know, should we add a 13th house at the end, or because they're a dual sign like this, should we consider any planet that's in the second half of the 8th as the Ophiuchus part of the 8th, and everything in the first half of the 8th as the Scorpio part of the 8th. In other words, that the 13th house, let's say the 13th house, is the second half of the 8th, right? Which is where Ophiuchus is in the sky. The second part of the 8th. Second, because it passes through the ecliptic in the second part, right? We got Scorpio passes over the ecliptic at the first part. Ophiuchus passes over the ecliptic in the second part. So this is very interesting because if you have any planets in your 8th house, then there would be a difference, as there is for any house, but a very important difference perhaps, between planets that are at the first half of that 8th house or the second half of the 8th house, right? So planets in the first half of the 8th would be more like Scorpio energy, or the Scorpio parts of life, which is the 8th house. And planets in the second half of the 8th would be more of the healer, more of the Ophiuchus part of life, area of life. So it would deal more with where we can heal, probably more like psychology, more spiritual parts of the 8th, things of that nature, whereas the first half might deal more with research and maybe just deeper things in general, but not really working with it as much. So very interesting, yeah, splitting the houses. You can do that with any house, of course, because every house is progressing, right? You have the beginning of a house, which is a very different energy from the end of the house. And so as you go from the beginning to the end, you are evolving through that house. But the 8th could be, in my opinion, very important for that reason that it's associated with, Ophiuchus. Hey, Javanti. Great to have you. Peace and blessings from Arizona. Great to have you on. Right, so Machani, Machani says they are opposing in this position in terms of oppositions. So yeah, they're very different, but again, we want to try to integrate those two. All right, Julie's in Arizona too. So I won't get too specific into personal birth chart questions. So finding the light inside. Nothing too personal like that, but if you have something kind of general about Venus or Mars or Gemini, I'm happy to answer that. Oh, thank you, Ari Gold. Yeah, I love these live streams. Yeah, it's fun. All right, so Sagittarius coming after Ophiuchus is that post-transformation. After the death and then the rebirth comes the rebirth, the post-rebirth, which is Sagittarius, the free spirit, the adventurous one. All right, so we'll go ahead and start closing this out here. It looks like it's already been well over an hour. So we'll go ahead and just finish up some final questions. Again, great having you all on here. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll probably do this more often. Another 7th house galactic center. Wow. Did I read that twice? Was that you already, Christine? I'm afraid to scroll up because then I'll lose my place here. Lindsay asks, do you have any plans to do forecasts for specific signs in the future? Or likewise, any thoughts on doing annual forecasts for all signs? I used to do those annual, for those of you who've been around, I think I stopped them about 6 years ago, but ever since I first started this, which is like 12 years ago, I did those annual ones, but maybe I'll do them again. The reason I stopped is because they just weren't getting promoted on YouTube, and it was around that time that YouTube really started to change their algorithm. It takes a lot of energy to do those yearly forecasts, but they are only once a year, so I will consider perhaps doing them again. We'll see. I'm leaning more towards something more interactive, maybe like the app or something like this. I'm also working on a future report. So a lot of you who've gotten your personal report, your natal chart report, I'm working on a future report. So then you'll have a printout of all of your future transits, which would be really cool. So you'll have that in a PDF as well. So I'm working more towards those things, but I'll definitely keep that in mind. But yeah, maybe in a live stream or something, not annual for all signs, but something like, maybe more of a year ahead look. I think that's a great idea. Oh man, this YouTube thing the chat just bounces around. Oh man, there's so many more questions. Okay. Let's see. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna kind of rush through these final questions here. So staying grounded with the Ophiuchus anywhere the Ophiuchus is, or with your 8th house, is always the opposite. So anytime you want to stay grounded with anything, look at the opposite sign, look at the opposite house. That's always where you can ground it. And the 8th house grounding is Taurus, or the 2nd house. Ophiuchus, the opposite to that is Taurus. The opposite to the 8th is the 2nd. The 2nd in Taurus is about literally grounding. So going into nature, having a good meal, anchoring in your self-worth, self-value, things like this, which as you can see is very much needed for personal transformation. Yeah, maybe I'll do a video on that galactic center. I don't think I have one, yeah. Yeah, so with tropical, with sidereal, true sidereal, we're still using the tropical interpretations. For the most part, there are some slight differences like with the ascendant, but for the most part, you can take everything you know about the tropical signs, what you know about tropical astrology, and just apply it to the true sidereal chart. Yeah, and American, Copper, Dragon Chili said it. The interpretations are the same. It's the placements that are different. Yeah, Rudolf Steiner, I wouldn't say I studied him because he's got so many books and such lengthy books. But I have read some of his work, and I do plan on reading more, and I do incorporate a lot of his ideas into my astrology practice. So yeah, for those of you who don't know who Rudolf Steiner is and you're into true sidereal, you are in for a treat. Definitely read some Steiner. All right, so there's an app called The Mighty that's been used for Patreon groups. Okay, maybe I'll check that out. So Mind Mastery asks, does it mean that we're in a machine or simulation that keeps repeating? Well, the Hindus wouldn't say like it's a machine simulation, but certainly that we're repeating these karmic cycles. I think I think the most likely, obviously I don't know, but I think the most likely is we're just in this system that expands and contracts, and I think even what we think of as the Big Bang is just another cycle, honestly. And so you could maybe even think of it as the universe doing like this, growing, expanding, contracting. I don't know, but what is time anyways? I mean, time is a human construct that we sort of came up with. There really is only the now moment, and everything is acting from that now moment. And so in that sense, there's really only eternity, no real beginning and end. So if it keeps repeating, then it's been repeating forever, at least, forever or in infinity when we think of it in time sense, as human beings. All right. Theory states all plans. I want to go through here real quickly now. Apologize if I have to skip over some of these. We're going to go ahead and conclude it here pretty soon. Yeah. All right. Christine, I saw a meme of the planets saying, "Do not blame us for your behaviors." That's a good one. All right. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I couldn't get to all the questions here. All right. But lots of love. Thank you so much for joining. I think we'll do this more often. I hope it was informative. I loved reading your questions and even your comments about a lot of the things we discussed. It's really cool to have that interaction with you guys. So thanks so much, and I'll see you all in the next one. All right, take care. Bye-bye.